Samuel's calling is interesting to me because there's a lot of things with him that I think are things that we see with people who get called by God, especially to go into ministry. It's very common even today. Now, in Samuel's case specifically, he was dedicated to God even before he was born. His mother had not had any child, and she prayed to God and said, "If you give me a child, I will give him back to you." And that happened. So Samuel was kind of promised to the Lord to begin with. But it really isn't until past this point that he didn't really come to know him. And I don't necessarily think that that means that he wasn't a believer. I don't necessarily think that that wasn't that he, had some sort of, kind of what we would think of a relationship with God. I mean, he was working in the temple. I'm sure he had some sort of connection, but I don't think he had truly gotten to that point where he truly, managed to connect with God in the way that he really needed to be doing that his ministry. But here, after this calling, that very clearly happens. And this calling, I think, is interesting in many ways because of that. This is a man who is go on to anoint King David and really minister to the entirety of Israel for the rest of his life. And while he was dedicated to God in that sort of way, there's no way that he as a little kid would have thought that it would ever have sort of happened, that was kind of what God's sort of plan was for him. The fact that he doesn't recognize God's voice is really a great sign of that. He hears God calling him, and he, immediately assumes that it's Eli. And thankfully, Eli is there, a little bit of a wiser, priest, a priest who had been around, and he was able to recognize what was going on eventually, and guide Samuel to making the correct choice and listening to God. Now, I think Samuel's response is kind of what I really kind of want to focus down into, and you really kind of get into, because the fact that he, actually listened to what Eli said. He could have, I guess, just completely ignored God. Probably would not have gone the way he would have wanted it to. But hey, he could have done that. He could have done that. But the fact that he went ahead and said those words that Eli told him to say, and I'm sure had an understanding of, at least a partial understanding of what that would have meant. I think it says a lot. And, and the big thing that we can kind of take away from this, the big thing that we can kind of do to be like Samuel, kind of respond to God's call, is just understand, that when God calls us, how we respond, it does matter. It does, how we go about things does matter. If we are called, and we kind of just sort of ignore it or put it off or just kind of assume it's something completely different, we are missing out on what God has planned for us. But if we do, respond and go all into it, God will take us places that we could never even imagine. In Samuel's case, I don't necessarily think that, when he said those words, maybe he was fully invested at that time. He still was a kid, but I do think he had, again, that basic understanding. Even if you yourself aren't really sure, I think as long as you kind of make that choice and then make the choices afterwards to follow God's will and follow God's plan for you, you will be taken places that you could never even imagine. Amen. Now I'd like to invite you all to join me for our last worship song today.